Get ready for truth and transparency from an ocean of liberal tears. Welcome to the Blue Shark Show with your host, Mike Lang.
Granbury ISD special called meeting, June 2nd, 2022. Couldn't wait for June 13th. And the question of this meeting has to do with their SOPs, standard operating procedures, policies. They hadn't done it since 2019, and now all of a sudden we have to hurry up and do it. It's an emergency. Let's get it done. Barbara Townsend said everybody's going to be there. Let's go ahead and do it.
My concern as to why this is before the board today. You have a meeting scheduled for June the 13th, which is less than 2 weeks away, and why we had to rush this to a special session is beyond me, especially when the special session is being held at noon on Thursday. I would agree with the other speakers. It smacks of a lack of transparency and a desire to not have the ultimate in community involvement. So I have a concern with what we're doing today based on the timing of it.
The bottom line for this meeting is why and who. But let's start with the executive session. Nate, glad to have you back.
In their regular meetings, which this was a special called meeting, but in their regular meetings, Granbury ISD's executive session always lasts exactly 1 hour. That's what they call a standing executive session, and some say that flies in the face of the Texas Open Meetings Act, but this day, that meeting lasted an hour and a half, the executive session portion, which after that first hour, a lot of people in the audience who follow the school board started talking, saying, what are they doing back there? It's always an hour, and with it being a special called meeting, they didn't have to do the executive session up front. They could have done it or just not done it at all. But after they had been back there for over an hour, people started saying, man, whatever is happening back there is not good. And as soon as the board trustees walked out of the back room and into the front, you could see it on a lot of their faces.
And, to put the SOPs on a special called meeting and then spend, 15, 20 minutes throughout the whole meeting with Barbara Townsend explaining that they haven't done the SOPs for 3 years, but they have to do it right now. But they didn't do it because of COVID. And then all of a sudden, 6 months ago, they decided to do it and gave it to Barbara Harrington, basically, to rewrite the SOPs. And then the input from what Barbara Townsend said was they didn't email or ask for any input. It was all input that the trustees said, hey, I've got input on that. This is what I want to do. And do you think everybody was notified on that?
No, I don't think so. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Barbara Townsend said that started the night Courtney and Melanie were sworn in.
Well, it was right around that time where they started doing the new SOPs. Imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please like and smash that like and subscribe button for YouTube and Rumble and the Mike Lang Show. And since you brought that up about the timing aspect of it, one of the big sticking points, and we had a lot of people that came up there to speak. You spoke. There was probably 4 or 5 people that spoke, and they were kind of against, they were for tabling this until the public could see it, and they can take the proposed changes against the, what policy they already had and look at it. But it wasn't given. There was no red line. Everything was done, once again, government style, typical socialist government style. Got to hurry up and do it, hurry up and pass it. But you brought up the time of the 2 new trustees coming on board to change the SOPs, and it's funny how it went from 1 on the agenda, 1 trustee, to be able to put something on the agenda, to 3. You have to have the okay for 3 trustees now, basically what they were talking about, on the agenda to have something. Why in the world would you need to have the okay from 3 trustees that each one are elected?
Well, it's pretty obvious to a lot of us that were there and have, studied the pattern of local governments. Governments, whenever they have somebody that they consider to not go along to get along, they'll start changing the rules to do what they can to neutralize that person. And that's why these rules are being changed. We've seen similar things down in Round Rock ISD almost 10 years ago with Terry Romier, a former guest on the show. When she was on the school board, they censured her 6 or 7 times, but they started by changing the rules so they could get her in trouble through their own rules. Now, fortunately, those rules have no actual consequence. The only thing they can do is censure somebody or, pen a letter asking for their resignation. But the school board has absolutely no authority to eject one of its own members.
There was a motion brought up to change, they had 3 written in, is what Barbara Harrington had on the paper. So they wanted to change it to 2 instead of 3. And the explanations that were given by some of the board members were, hey, if you can't get a second, then we won't have to waste the board's time, right? Because the board's time is utmost valuable, important. Forget about the kids, but we don't want to waste time about talking about anything that is indivisive or may give a difference of opinion. So, they changed it to 2 instead of 3. And they used that crap of an excuse as, the reason to do that. So maybe what I would suggest is instead of electing our school board at large, let's go ahead and do places. Let's do geographical places where each person has to be where they live in a geographical location, and maybe then they will see how important it is for each individual elected member to have a say, and stop with this nobody gets a second crap.
Yeah, and that, for a transparent government, you want to know where your elected officials stand. And by making this to where a single member of the board can't put an item on the agenda, that prohibits that. And I bring that up because this is all in preparation for, I believe, the November election where Barbara Townsend, the school board president, Mark Jackson, and Paula McDonald will all be on the ballot. Between now and then, they do not want any controversial votes to take place, because if they do, they're going to be held accountable to the voters, and they know that Melanie would be the one to bring up these concerns.
Yeah, and how dare she brings them up, and TASB, indoctrinates all the new board members and old board members that you have to be on the same page. There can be no dissension because of those votes, and, everybody wants to stay on the board and be elected and slap the teachers on the back and, hug the kids. And I get all that, put their names on plaques if the bond passes. I get that. But at the end, you work for the citizens of Granbury ISD. They pay the bills, period. Now, if you're a teacher, you live in the district, great. You work for the teacher, I get it. But you work for the citizens of Granbury ISD. You don't work directly for the teachers. You don't work directly for the kids. You're there as a government elected official to buffer these kinds of things against the citizens. And one person did a great job.
Yeah, and she's the only one that acts as the buffer right now on that board, and which is sad because, we've had other people elected in recent elections that just haven't lived up to the expectations.
But, we can say whatever we want about they vote this way, they vote that way. I give credit to the people that stand for their convictions. If they're different than mine, so be it. If they're different than yours, that's fine. I respect people that can fight like that and put forth effort. Whether we agree or not, that's the part I respect. What I don't respect is somebody that abstains if there's no conflict of interest. Now, if there's a conflict of interest, I get it. but you're abstaining from a vote, meaning you're not going to vote yes or no. To me, that is lukewarm. Take a dadgum position, yes or no.
And we have one abstention.
You're absolutely right. And yesterday, Paula McDonald did abstain a couple times up there. And I hate to see that. You know, she did the anti-CRT thing about a year ago. And I think after that, she saw what happens when you stand up. And she decided, no, I don't want to go through all that. I'm going to be conflict avoidant. And I'm just going to make every excuse in the world to avoid conflict. And that, we've been trying to do that for the last 60 years in public education, and look at where it's got us. You know, I think right now we need to be focused on doing the right thing regardless of whatever arbitrary rules GISD has and regardless of whether or not it's going to cause any conflict. Because when you're doing the right thing, you're going to piss some people off, and that's okay.
And it is. And you can take whatever route you want. You can go by your convictions. You can do what you feel is right. And I get that. And the only thing, like I said, is stand up. You know, whether I agree with you or not, I applaud the people that stand up and at least can explain their position.
Yeah.
And then the voters can decide whatever they want come voter time.
This whole process yesterday, I believe, was an exercise to keep the voters from being able to really tell in a binary way were you for or against whatever the item is. And in the future meetings now, we're having to have 3. They don't want that. Government avoids accountability like the plague, especially in election years. You know, I find it no coincidence that Barbara Townsend took the position she did, Paula McDonald's took the position she did, and then...
Well, and we go back to, you know, this 2 or 3, and it ended up being 2. You know, so now you have to have 2 trustees to put something on the agenda, and it passed 4-1. And the one, you know, dissent, one negative was Melanie Graff, and the one abstention was, you know, Dr. Paula McDonald, and the rest voted to have 2 and not 1. So during this time frame, Melanie Graff kept asking the question, why are we doing this, and who put this on as a policy or procedure? And it was crickets. And you had Barbara Townsend looking at Barbara Harrington, looking at all the other members back and forth.
Who changed this policy? I've asked that question a couple of times, and so I'd like to know who asked for this to change.
And then, you know, here comes a COVID excuse again. Here comes all this stuff. Here comes Barbara Harrington was doing this for 6 months. Nobody would own up to it until finally Melanie said it so many times that Barbara Townsend says, look, it wasn't me. And I'm not at liberty to say who it was.
It was not me. I don't feel that I'm at liberty to say. So, that's the motion out there. Is there any other discussion?
Time out, folks. This is elected officials, and you're not at liberty to say who's making these policies and procedures. Once again, whoever it was, and evidently it wasn't Townsend, it wasn't Melanie, Mark Jackson was not there, and, you know, Barbara Townsend looked around like somebody was there who did it. Stand up on your own 2 feet and own it. You're an elected official. Own it. And I think that's part of the cowardiceness of being an elected official that I just can't stand.
You know, that was so cringy to watch in real time. I felt as if we had shifted into a parallel universe during that time where Melanie asked the question and Barbara said, well, and she just kind of looks around, and everyone in the audience was kind of looking around too, like, why are they not wanting to say who did it? And I'm just going to use some deductive reasoning here. If Barbara Harrington is the one that spearheaded this, she must have been okay with it if she wasn't the one to write that provision herself, and it also makes me wonder, did this idea come about because they were terrified of what might happen if we continue to have one person? And Barbara Harrington's been on that board for a long time, and it's common for elected officials to feel like they are somehow higher than the others due to seniority. If you remember when Ted Cruz and Rand Paul first got into the Senate, they were ticking off a lot of their fellow senators because they're like, "Hey, you're a junior. You can't do anything.
Yeah, how dare you?
How dare you?" Yeah. And there was some of that going on yesterday where it was implied through things Harrington and Townsend both said that, basically, Melanie, you've put some stuff on the agenda already that, we feel wasn't necessary to be discussed or whatever, and is being divisive, or it's tough on people to do the right thing. And, it's just important that we keep, supporting the one or hopefully ones that are doing the right thing.
As the meeting continues, Barbara Townsend's trying to hurry up to get this meeting over with, to get it done, to vote the SOPs in. And what we find is all of a sudden it kind of takes an abrupt turn as Melanie keeps asking why, who, and then there was crickets. Then they wanted to hurry up and get this over with because they didn't want to answer that question. Nobody wanted to speak up. And the crowd started getting into this. They knew what was going on. They knew what was going to happen with this, that it was going to pass. And they wanted a table just to look at. And there's some remarks from the crowd. And Barbara, who was controlling the meeting, lost control and had to gavel down, order, order, order.
I was asked to do that. It made sense. I like the idea of the two so that you're going to have a second. That's where we are.
You've worked on it for 6 months. This is what I'm hearing. Sorry, old. 6 months.
Call to order. Call to order.
Railroading it.
Call to order.
Communism. I swear to God.
You're trying to get her off the board is what you're trying to do. You know it. No, I won't shut up.
No.
For the second meeting in a row, Barbara Townsend lost control of the meeting. We've seen this a couple times now. It's like this board is paralyzed by their reluctance to take issues head on. They don't want to be on the record. They just want to take the ostrich approach, bury their head in the sand, and pretend that there's not still elements of CRT in the schools, that they didn't just pass a pro-CRT stipend for the student teachers, that there's not still porn in the libraries, that the way that they're conducting themselves is somehow transparent. They just want it all to go away, and they want the school board to go back to being a mutual admiration society where they tell each other how good of a job they're doing every single meeting. And the reality is that the voters have seen now through these last few years of what all is taking place in public education, and they're tired of it. They, some of us have been saying for years that communism has infiltrated all these institutions, and now there's no way to deny that it's happened, even in Granbury ISD. But unfortunately, the majority of our school board does not want to acknowledge any of this. They want it to go away. They want everyone to shut up and go back to doing what they were doing. But the Republican majority and the conservative majority and the moral majority of Hood County is not going to allow that to happen.
Why? I mean, you got to ask the question. Melanie did literally 20 plus times. Why and who? And it all boils down to the question of the citizens. All right. They are elected. All those school board members are elected. And if you can't step up and be the one that said, this is why I did it, when somebody asked, you're a coward. If you don't want to stand up, then maybe you need to find another job. At least, like I said earlier, at least if you're going to be on the other side from where my opinion is, my vote is, at least stand up for yourself. Make your case and let the people decide, come November, where you stand and if they're going to vote for you. I respect that. I don't respect the cowardness of not voting, the cowardness of not standing up for your convictions. That is what I think it's time for somebody else to step in. But getting back to some of the things we've talked about already, you look at the bond failure. You look at the porn in the schools. In Granbury ISD, you're right. And you look at all the things going on around the country with CRT. And in the last probably year, there's been a light that has shined upon Granbury ISD, and thank them for putting these on YouTube where we can see it, where people can watch it, where we can talk about it. And they don't like it. They don't like it at all. They're programming the board members, TASB is, just like they program your kids at the public schools. And yes, it is occurring. And I keep saying, where are the teachers, the good moral teachers to stand up? And then you have to think, if you're a teacher and you're going to stand up, who's going to back you? Is it going to be the entire trustees of Granbury ISD? You'll be lucky to get one trustee to back you up. So I can kind of see, but there has to be a new culture put in place where our teachers, our administrators, our trustees can stand up for the moral values. In this book thing, and they talked a little bit about it, some of the people did, the porn in schools where you have to go through this process and the trustees don't want to hear about it or be bothered by it, you're elected. It should bother you. It should be forefront in this thing of you don't have time to do stuff. Well, then you shouldn't be on the board. This should be number one priority is smutting schools. And all this citizen stuff that you just voted on, your SOPs, to silence more and more of the moral majority, it's going to come back to bite you. Shark Show out.